Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1291 of the Locked on Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Thursday evening into Friday here in early August. And thank you for joining us, as always, on the podcast, making us your first listen each and every day. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, etc. on the audio side, YouTube on the video side. And I really do appreciate everybody checking out the podcast. As always, it's been a little bit of a downtime in the NBA. Of course, not a whole lot going on. And through that lens, I'm actually taking a sort of big picture look over the next couple episodes. I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Bill DiFilippo from Uprock Sports and Dime. He's one of my editors and co-workers over there at Dime. We talk about basketball all the time, and now we're taking it in front of the microphones at this point. And over three episodes. This is actually going to be part one of three, talking about the Eastern Conference, sort of some team capsules, see how teams were changed in the offseason, see how teams projected in the offseason as well, bet on lines, future odds, and win totals are out at this point, so I'll touch on a little bit of that as well. And then, of course, at some point along the way, we'll talk about the Hawks all the way through, as well as a full-on Hawks look at some point on these three podcasts as well with myself and Bill. So a informative conversation happening, obviously, over a couple of different episodes here, but please stay tuned. Roll over to part two when that comes, part three, etc., as they'll be arriving next week. This is actually going to be part one standing on its own on this Thursday into Friday. Then we'll have more next week with Bill and I. There is a little bit of news, though, at the top of the show. Not a huge news thing. I will just certainly admit that right now. But as we knew heading into July and into August, etc., the Hawks are going to be playing at least two of their games. They've sort of have been scheduled in the preseason. And basically, the Hawks are going to be playing the Bucks over in Abu Dhabi in early October. That was already announced. We just talked about it on the podcast, October 6th, October 8th. That is two legs of the Hawks exhibition schedule at this point in time, and the league's been touting those games as the first in the UAE and the Arabian Gulf, etc. Earlier this week, though, the Pelicans announced their schedule for the preseason at this point in time, and it includes the Hawks in an interesting spot. So on Friday, October 14th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, the Hawks are going to Birmingham, actually, to play a game in the Legacy Arena. That's the home of the Pelicans G League team over in Birmingham. Also, the finale for the Pelicans. I would imagine, if I had to guess, it'll be the last game for the Hawks as well. That's not confirmed at this point in time because the Hawks have not announced their schedule in full. But that'll be a home game for New Orleans, technically, but again, in Birmingham. So I know there are a lot of Hawks fans in Alabama or on the west side of Georgia that might like to go to Birmingham. Sort of a close drive. I'm sure that I will be there, barring something crazy happening, because it's not that far away. A pretty interesting sort of exhibition spot, standalone. And again, it could be the last opportunity to see the Hawks before the opener, which has not been scheduled just yet, but usually it's in that mid to late October range for the entire NBA. That's what I'm told is going to happen this time around. So it might be a nice little tune-up, and I'm not too far away. So put that one on your schedule at this point in time. All right, with all of that out of the way, we'll have the intro to this podcast, and I'll be back with Bill DiFilippo talking about the Eastern Conference, all kinds of teams on this first episode. We'll cover 5 or 6 interesting teams on this podcast. So stay tuned. Here's the intro, and we'll roll through the Eastern Conference.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Bill, welcome back to the podcast. I already introduced you before I brought you in, so no formal introduction for someone I work with every day of my life, but welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Brad. It was a very nice introduction. I'm honored, and I didn't hear any of it.
Beautiful. That's what we like to see on this podcast. I will say, I told you this before we started recording, but your last appearance on the show was episode 1094, so about 200 episodes ago. And it was like in October-ish of last year. And the day that we talked about the East, which was actually the same topic as today, we talked about Ben Simmons showing up at the arena in Philadelphia unannounced that day in the preseason, and also the Nets basically sending Kyrie Irving home. A lot has changed since then.
Well, listen, everything worked out for everyone involved in that, both of those situations, so it's all good.
Ben Simmons no longer on the Sixers, as we'll talk about later on in this podcast.
And I'll tell you this, Kyrie Irving certainly is getting paid by the Nets right now.
I hope that between us recording this podcast and it being posted, he's not traded, because that's the one thing that could possibly happen is a trade involving like Donovan Mitchell or Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving. That's kind of it as far as what would affect us, but that could happen. It's that time.
Yeah, we'll get the Pacers involved. The Knicks could get in here. Maybe the Raptors somehow slide. We'll just really derail the entire hour and a half or whatever we're going to do here, because the NBA decided after 3 weeks of not doing anything, now is finally the time to get going.
As we record a podcast about the East. Yeah, that was almost certainly will happen. But as I said before I brought you in, we're going to talk about basically every team in the East in some form, some longer than others, I'm sure. We'll spend a lot of time on Indiana. As you referenced, that's the most sexy team in the league at this juncture. But this first little segment is going to be about the Atlantic Division, I think. We're going to start at the top because, unfortunately for Hawks fans that do not like the Celtics are the current betting favorite to win the East. They are the reigning Eastern Conference champions. And I will say, our friends at Bet Online actually have the Celtics off the board right now in terms of over-unders because of the KD thing, I guess,
Yeah.
because they had a number until the Jaylen Brown KD thing happened, and then they took them off the board, along with, by the way, the Knicks and the Nets and the Jazz are all off the board at this point in time. But even without KD, Boston's pretty good. I mean, in the offseason, they basically ran back an Eastern Conference champion and got like notably better by adding Brogdon and, of course, Hawks' favorite, Danilo Gallinari, also a favorite of yours, Italian heritage.
That's right.
There it is. But yeah, I mean, is Boston going to be as good or better? Because they seem like they're going to be better, but they were, I guess, only the quote unquote 2 seed last year.
I think they should. I mean, the thing that really makes me optimistic about this Boston team, beyond the fact that they added a guy in Malcolm Brogdon, who I think really helps with a lot of the stuff that we saw they needed to be better at against the Golden State Warriors, that kind of secondary ball handler, can even be a primary ball handler for stretches of time, guy who can provide some more perimeter defense. Danilo Gallinari coming in, providing shooting, even if he's just a regular season innings eater. With how bad Boston was during the first half of last season, like it's weird. It's part of the narrative around them, just how bad that team, like it legitimately seemed like Ime Udoka might have been a one and done coach. It legitimately seemed like the calls to break up Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum had more merit than maybe any other time. And then something just flipped, and down the last 2-3 months of the regular season, for me, they were the best team in basketball, and they finished 2 games behind the Miami Heat with the 51-31 record. They're not going, unless they get some absolutely wretched injury luck, I don't think they're going to be that bad this year for really any stretch of time. So with all respect, mostly to Milwaukee, because they are the other team that I think is in this conversation, I think Boston's the clear-cut best team in the East.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually there, so I remember this very, very, very clearly. But to your point about how much they struggled, and I think it's not even been talked about enough, when they lost to the Hawks on January 28th, they were 25-25.
Mm-hmm.
And then they rolled to 51 wins. Like, it's really hard to go to 51 wins when you start 25-25. Like, that's a very difficult thing to do. That means
they lost 6 more games for the rest of the year.
26-6 the rest of the way. And then, playoff run was what it was. And, I was skeptical of Boston last year and looked to be right for a long time. And then I suddenly was not right anymore. But, like, their roster, like you said, like, they're not necessarily infallible, but the depth that they have when you bring in Brogdon and, again, Gallo is not fantastic at this point, but Gallo as your 8th man, 9th man on the roster, like, is a really good player to have around, and he can shoot it in the way they need, of course. And Brogdon, has some injury stuff, but they don't necessarily need Brogdon that badly to be that great. Obviously, he's overqualified for the role he's going to have. He might not even start on this team. Like, they still have Marcus Smart, who's really good. And yeah, I mean, I don't want to praise Boston too much on this podcast because Hawks fans won't like it. But they're really good.
Can I push a potential reason why just one little reason I'm concerned about them?
100%. Bring it on.
Al Horford was excellent last year after, for all intents and purposes, redshirting the year before in Oklahoma City and having an entire year of just not putting any wear and tear on his body. Robert Williams, for how wonderful the basketball player he is a guy who is prone to injury. Just what I think, I'm interested in your thought on this, Brad. If Father Time catches up to him a little bit because he just went through all of last season, if Robert Williams picks up 2 or 3 nagging injuries that kind of ride with him all year, that's the one way that I think they can go from the clear-cut best team in the East to, okay, not as good as Milwaukee during the regular season, maybe not as good as Philly during the regular season, talk real wild, maybe not as good as the Heat during the regular season. But other than that, I don't really have any concerns. What about you?
No, you're right. I think that is the way. If you want to find a weakness, barring just a weird injury to Tatum or Brown or whatever, it would be that. Because Al, who I love unconditionally, still.
Yes.
He was fantastic in the playoffs. He was fantastic regular season once he found his groove. But, he's my age, and I'm not a young man, Bill. So it is, I would say, almost safe to assume that Al will not be quite as good next year, even with just regular aging curve stuff beyond anything else. And Robert Williams, I agree, like has been really good when he's played, but had the knee thing and whatever else. And, Daniel Tice is not like the greatest basketball player in the world, but that was their one opportunity cost to getting Brogdon, was trading Tice away. And he's, again, you do that trade every single time.
Yes.
But Tice is a very, very solid backup center. They don't really have that guy now. Like, it's Grant Williams, who's 6'6" or whatever, but he can do it. But, they don't have a ton of depth there, because Gallo might play some center for them, but defensively he can't do anything on the back line. So, like, in theory, Gallo takes that roster spot, that rotation spot. But if something were to happen to Al as far as decline or injury and Robert Williams, then you're in some trouble, because you don't really have much else.
Yeah, and it is important to stress, Daniel Tice will somehow find a way to get back on the ball.
I'm sure he will.
Through hell or high water, and this will all sound ridiculous, but yeah.
They absolutely love Daniel Tice. Okay, you're on record, Bill. I think you just picked Boston. We'll wait till the end. You can come back and sort of refute that if you want to. But they do have the highest over/under for a reason. They are going to be very good, and if they get KD, it's a whole other discussion, which that could happen at some point too. All right, before we get to the rest of the Atlantic, a quick word to hear from our sponsors on the podcast. Today's show is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check on all of your sports betting needs. At this point, find all of the latest and all of your favorites, honestly, sports and events, are the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. They have a ton of future-facing action as well. Football season is now huge, of course, in the sports betting space. The NFL, college football, futures, and much more. And NBA stuff is open now. Win totals, conference futures, NBA finals futures, etc. Find reviews and the news of all the leagues that you're interested in. That includes baseball, of course, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, soccer, golf, tennis, auto racing, horse racing, rugby, entertainment bets, and much more. And BetOnline also has the #1 source for all the wagering information that you might want. That includes live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. And they have other things available to you that might be interesting depending on what you prefer in the betting space. That includes casino games, poker, and other ways that you can possibly get on the action. At this point, head to BetOnline right now on your computer or mobile device and learn more about all of the trends and the action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Bill. Philadelphia 76ers, who I kind of think are like your team, even though they're really not. Like I think of them as your NBA team, because you don't really have an NBA team like in that same way that you're like a Penn State guy. You don't have a Penn State level NBA affiliation, but the Sixers are kind of your team, right? Am I lying here?
Not really. I mean,
you don't have one.
I don't have one. I just know a lot of Sixers fans,
which is why I'm saying
by nature going past that. And like I've been a huge Joel Embiid fan from the time he was in college. So the fact that he's on this team, like I want to see him do well, because he's a fun basketball player.
He's also a great poster, so he provides content for us on a regular basis. Joel
right.
is arguably the #1 content producer in the NBA for the laughs. So there's that.
That's right.
We like that about Joel. But no, I mean, other than trolling you, Philly is going to be good again. Their over/under is 50.5 right now at BetOnline. That is a lot of wins for any basketball team. And actually, last year they won exactly that. They won 51 games. And I think that, there was a lot of discussion, and there probably will be more discussion about like how they got the Harden thing done. There's some tampering things going on there, but they basically swap out Danny Green, who got injured anyway. Unfortunately, we love Danny Green, and DeAndre Jordan for PJ Tucker, DeAnthony Milton, and Daniel House. That is an upgrade. You could say
yes.
press the upgrade button on that for Philly. So like on paper, it's like, why is their over/under the same now as it was last year? And I think the only way to maybe square that is actually to bring up Joel, because he was so good. Obviously MVP level, and like was deserving of. I mean, I know he didn't win, but he would have been deserving to win it. Is this kind of a bet against Joel repeating that, or is it just like a Harden skepticism, or like I don't know. I don't know what to make of, because obviously on paper they're better than they were last year.
Yeah, I wonder how much of it is just like people not buying the. For lack of a better word, propaganda coming out of Philly about how James Harden is taking this offseason seriously and looking better than ever. When we saw with our eyes, it's a point that I've seen plenty of people make, heard plenty of people make. Like Philly thought they were getting a top 5 player in the NBA with James Harden. And if they got a top 15 to 20 player in the NBA with James Harden, they're still going to be a very good team. They're still going to be a playoff team. They're just not going to have any chance of being the best, competing for a championship, anything like that. So I do, you're saying about, Embiid God, if Embiid can do 31 points, 12 rebounds, 4 assists, 1.5 blocks, and 1 steal a game again, God bless that man. But it feels like that should come down to earth a bit. It feels like Harden's in don't say what you're going to do, show what you're going to do mode. And candidly, I think that's a correct place to be with James Harden at this point.
Yeah.
But for all of that, I think Philly, I'm like everyone. I think they knocked this summer out of the park. I think PJ Tucker next to Embiid, bringing some switching, bringing some toughness, some tenacity, a guy who knows how to play with Harden, a guy who's going to knock down threes was a really good addition. I don't know if I love it at 3 for $30 million when he's 37 years old right now, but I don't get paid to make those decisions. I think I'm like every person who watches basketball and has a Twitter account, and I love DeAnthony Melton, and I think he's a really good guard to have next to either Tyrese Maxey or James Harden in most situations. I would think. I don't know if I'd play all three of them at the same time. That's not a particularly big backcourt, but neither here nor there. And I think Daniel House is the kind of switchy 3-and-D wing that they just did not have last year. So I think this is going to be a very good basketball team. I don't think they are as good of a team as Boston, but on the whole, man, it's not a perfect team. I still don't know how many guys second or third down the depth chart other than Melton I really trust for them. But that starting 5, Maxey, Harden, Tobias Harris, PJ Tucker, Joel Embiid, whatever it looks like, they're going to go into every game and they're going to give Philly a chance to win.
Yeah, I love Melton. Part of why I like what they did so much is that I've always loved Melton. And listen, PJ Tucker might just fall off a cliff. It's like PJ Tucker is an old man, but if he is the guy he was last year, like he helps them so much. It's not. I mean, he's such a valuable playoff player, and he's a guy they just haven't had on this team, like that role. Him and Tobias are like similar size, but Tobias, being kind of slotted back into what he probably should be doing rather than what he has been asked to do as the primary defender of those kind of big forwards. I don't know. I like what they did. We'll see. And I think the two big factors is like the most obvious thing in the world. It's like, okay, can Embiid stay healthy and do what he did again? And also, how good is James Harden? And you touched on that, but it's like, that's it. I mean, Philly can't win the title without those two things being good and good. Like, they could be really good, if Embiid is 90% of himself and Harden is just a pretty good, fringe star level player, they'll still be really good. They just can't win the title. So it's
And the thing that I, to kind of contradict myself, the thing that I sometimes forget about with Harden was last season not last season, year before that, before he hurt his hamstring, his time with Houston was just a wash. He goes to Brooklyn and he played so well that there was legitimately a question of, is James Harden going to appear on MVP ballots? So I don't think this is a guy who is completely, totally washed. I think there's still something in him. I think that hamstring needs to get healthy. Again, I can't blame anyone for betting against him, but maybe this is something I just have to remind myself is that we're a little more than a year removed from James Harden going to Brooklyn and looking like one of the best players in basketball.
Yeah, that's not far away. I should also say the words Tyrese Maxey out loud in this discussion at some point.
Yeah, he's
really
very good.
Yeah, I mean, I was all in on Maxey in the draft. That proves to be, I think, correct at this point. But I will say just a little bit of cold water. Like he shot the heck out of the ball last year. That's probably not like 100% real. I was like 43% from 3 for the full season. I don't know. I mean, they do lose a little bit of juice from what they've had at certain spots, but they are better overall for sure. And I hope that they're good. I mean, I know not as many Philly fans as you do necessarily, but I root for my Philly fan friends to have success. Like Mike Levine just needs it, just deep down in his soul. It's my guy.
Sixers fans are definitely among the NBA's best fan bases at keeping all of us entertained. So
that is 100% true. Okay, moving on from there is let's just do the very, very weirdest team next.
Oh God!
And it's the Brooklyn Nets. So I will say this.
Here, let me ask you: can we even have a conversation about the Brooklyn Nets? Because Lord knows what they're going to look like in 5 minutes.
Agreed. No, I was actually going to set this up for you because on July 21st, you and I are working together that day, and you wrote a piece called "So What If the Nets just keep Kevin Durant?" And like that's possible. They might keep Kevin Durant because they might decide we're not trading you, Kevin. And I don't think Kevin Durant's going to not show up.
Correct.
I don't. Now he might, but he likes to play basketball. Kevin Durant likes basketball, unlike Ben Simmons, who doesn't like basketball. So he doesn't. I'm just saying. But no, I think that KD, if you're picking a superstar that wouldn't just not show up, KD would be pretty high on the list for me. I think he just likes to play basketball. So like that's possible. And also they could move him. They kind of built their offseason, which you got into in that piece, which could be read at uprocks.com/sports or dime. They kind of built a team like around Kevin Durant, and he's not there. Like they went and got Royce O'Neal, and like they went TJ Warren's on this team now.
Right. They traded a first-round pick for Royce O'Neal 5 minutes after Kevin Durant's trade request went public.
I mean, let's just say this now. There is no chance that deal wasn't already done.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
There's no chance that deal wasn't already done. It's still very funny. The way it came out was the funniest thing imaginable because Royce O'Neal, who I like, isn't worth a first-round pick. Like I like Royce O'Neal. That was an overpay even when they had Kevin Durant on the team. So like I don't know. This team is so weird. They did lose Bruce Brown to Denver. They lose Andre Drummond, who's actually pretty good for them last year. I'm not the biggest Drummond guy, but it's a backup center. That was a nice guy to have on your roster. TJ Warren is like a giant question mark. Who the heck knows? He was available for basically nothing for a reason because he has not played in 2 years. But if he's good, he's good. But yeah, I mean, we can't really talk about them because it's like, okay, they're either going to have Kevin Durant on the team and they'll be really good, or they're going to trade Kevin Durant for shrug. I mean, if they had Jaylen Brown on the team with Kyrie, they'd be good. I don't know how good they'd be. They'd be good.
There's one point I want to add to the part that you threw out there about Kevin Durant not sitting out. And I completely agree with you. I don't think he's the kind of guy that would sit out, in large part because he just loves playing basketball. But think of how many things we've heard over the last however many years about how kind of, what's the word, aware Kevin Durant is of the conversation around him, of how people view his legacy, how, you know, one reason that he didn't like what was going on in Golden State was, you know, it was kind of viewed of he joined them and they won titles with him. And there was, I believe there was a report that Golden State winning a title this year kind of accelerated his request for a trade because it made him go, oh, they won one before I won one. And you put that stuff together, and I just don't think a guy that cognizant of his legacy and how he is viewed by basketball fans and basketball public would go, yeah, I'm just going to take my ball and go home and wait for you to trade. That just that just doesn't add up for me, with the complete understanding that I've been wrong about many things before in my life. But like you mentioned, you look at this Nets team and Joe Harris's health especially is a pretty major question mark over all of this, but Royce O'Neal is a solid 3-and-D wing. TJ Warren, he's a question mark, but I also think he's a low risk, high reward guy I believe they got him on the minimum, and he's going to just come in and give them some scoring punch on the perimeter outside of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, which was a huge issue last year because down the stretch of the season, once Kyrie Irving was able to play, Brooklyn's entire plan was basically, all right, Kevin and Kyrie, just go figure something out. We're going to play you 40 minutes a night. And by the time they got to the play-in, you could just tell that neither guy, KD especially, didn't have his legs. Like, I think Nick Claxton is a really interesting and talented big man. I love Kessler Edwards. I think he's a really interesting 3-and-D guy. Patty Mills is Patty Mills. Edmund Sumner, I think, is a nice roll of the dice. And then, you know, there's the huge question mark of what, if anything, are they going to get out of Ben Simmons? But like, the pieces are here. If Kevin Durant has a moment of clarity and decides he wants to stick around, if, you know, we go far enough down the road and the Lakers decide they're not throwing in 2 picks to get Kyrie Irving in exchange for Russell Westbrook. If they run this back, I could see this Nets team being very, very, very good. Yeah. Of course, I also don't think they're going to run this back.
Yeah, so. I don't either. I think if I had to guess now, you know, we're guessing. It is what it is. I think they'll probably move KD during camp or early in camp or something like that. But if they don't, I mean, you laid it out there. I didn't do a good job of this earlier, but like people have kind of forgotten how kind of loaded they are if they're healthy and have Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving on their team, because Ben Simmons is a shrug at this point, but he's Ben Simmons. Like, I think he's going to play, and he's still a talented guy. Joe Harris is back. Royce O'Neal, like you said, Nick Claxton got signed. They have Seth Curry, who's a bomber, is still on this roster. They have Patty Mills. It's mostly offensive talent, but like Warren can play defensive. He's around Kessler. Day'Ron Sharpe is like kind of a guy at this point. Like, I know they kind of have this extra scoring guard in Cam Thomas, who I've never been the biggest fan of, but he can get a bucket for you if you need one. So like, I don't know. I think KD might look around and be like, this might be my best chance to win this year at some point in October and November. Because like if Kyrie's around too, like they're still pretty good. I don't know. There's a reason why there's no over under though. Because there's no way to there's no way to set one counter in this team. It's like you have to have two different ones. It's like, okay, if KD opens the season, this is the number, and they're never going to do that. So.
Well, no, and then there would have to be, if KD opens the season, if KD doesn't, but Kyrie is still here, if neither of them are still here, if they get draft picks back, if they get players back right away, like there are just so many directions this way can go. Like it's for us in the content game who just want some stupid things to happen in the NBA, we'd prefer sooner rather than later. But figuring out what this Brooklyn team is going to be it's going to be fun over the next month and a half.
Let us go to Toronto, because they're almost the exact opposite of Brooklyn in that they didn't do really anything different. They signed Otto Porter. That was their big splash from the outside. Like they brought Thad Young back. They brought Chris Boucher back. They had a draft pick in Christian Koloko, who I kind of like, but he's a rookie. They didn't really do much, but they were good last year. I think almost underratedly good last year. And I think that, another year of Scotty Barnes, etc. They're the team, by the way, and we're saving the Hawks talk till the end of this conversation and probably part 2 or 3 or whatever it is going to be. But they're the team that's projected to be the closest to the Hawks right now in the East by over-unders. And I think if you look under the hood a little bit, like they had guys miss some games. Like they have some depth questions for sure, but if they're right and they're healthy, they're pretty good.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that. It feels like their big bet is that another year of Scotty Barnes, another year of OG Anunoby, another year of Gary Trent Jr., Precious Achiuwa, all these, Malachi Flynn, even if you want to, if you are still a believer in Malachi Flynn. Go Aztecs. That's right. Easily the best for Aztec in the NBA last season. If you put all that stuff together, mixed with what we know Pascal Siakam at his best and Fred VanVleet at his best are, and both of those guys are, they're fringe all-stars in the Eastern Conference, but they're still all-stars in the Eastern Conference. If all those young guys get 5 to 10% better, maybe Barnes takes a little bit more considerable of a leap just because of how young he is, they're a really dangerous, really tough basketball team. I mean, I still just one of these days, I want the Toronto Raptors to employ a center. After winning a title with Marc Gasol, it seems like Nick Nurse thought it would be had decided he just wants to go switch all over the place. If you're between 6'5" and 6'9", we'll employ you. But
there were some reports out there that they kind of were looking for a center, but I think they want like a guy, like a capital G guy, and those guys weren't available to them. It was like if they made a deal, it was gonna be for maybe they were kind of whispered about for Ayton for a minute at one point. Like if they were to that kind of stuff, it would have to be a real guy. I think they're either going to play this way or they're going to have a top 10 center. And it's with nothing in between. Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of with you though. I'd be interested to see what it looks like because look, their defense is really good as it is. And Thad Young, I love, and he can play center for them defensively. They still have OG who only played 48 games last year. I don't know. I mean, I think that Toronto needs a little bit of depth for me, but their top 7 is really good. And they're banking on that. They kind of drove on that last year, and they earned their 48 wins. They were a 47 win point differential team. That was not a fake 48 wins. That was a real team. And if anything, you would say that most of their guys are on the right side of the aging curve. Maybe the concern would be that maybe VanVleet levels off a little bit, but Scotty Barnes is 2021, Gary Trent's 23-ish, 24. They have some room to grow still. And Barnes, I've never been the highest on Scotty Barnes, but he was a lot better than I thought he was going to be as a rookie. Maybe he's even better next year.
And you mentioning that reminded me that Nick Nurse was just an insane person with minutes allocation last year. So I am now pulling this up.
They have the guys, man.
Last year, Pascal Siakam and Fred Van Vliet, there we go, both played 37.9 minutes a game. OG Anunoby played 36. Scotty Barnes played 35.4. Gary Trent Jr. played 35. The next guy who wasn't COVID spot player for them was Precious Achiuwa at 23.6 minutes per game.
No, I mean, if OG qualified, I was actually for a piece I wrote, I think of Sportsline, something like that. I looked this up. If OG had qualified, but he didn't quite qualify, they would have had 5 of the top 15 minutes per game guys in the league on their roster.
Yeah.
And even without that, they had 4 of the top. I'm looking at it now. It's 4 of the top 14 and 3 of the top 9. Pascal and Fred tied for the league lead in minutes per game.
Yeah, I mean, the good news for them is that Otto Porter, Chris Boucher, Precious Achiuwa as guys off the bench are 3 like very nice bench pieces. I don't know if I'm a big believer in Malachi Flynn. Delano Banton is a nice basketball player. They do need, if they are going to get reinforcement somewhere, I think it has to be in their backcourt. But at the very least, Scotty, Pascal, and OG, I don't think are going to play that many minutes again, which congratulations to their various ligaments, tendons, muscles, and other various things.
Yeah, you would think. No, I think that's, their over-under is 45.5. That seems kind of right to me, and they're right next to the Hawks, and we'll see if those teams battle.
The one thing I will say about Toronto is they seem to me like a team that might overperform that, if only because I expect them to go out every single night and play as hard as they possibly can and try to win as many. I don't think this is a team that's going to have a ton of nights off. Maybe they have off nights, but I don't think they're going to be games where you could just tell Scotty Barnes isn't bringing it. You could just tell Fred isn't bringing it. You could just tell OG it, like that sort of thing. So if they overperform that number, I think that's probably why they do it. But if they just are, chill, I guess is the word, I think that's about right.
And they never are chill. So there's that. All right, one more team, and they're also off the board in the Atlantic Division, is the Knicks. This one is a little bit less clear as to why they're off the board than Kevin Durant. So I'll just say this: it's because of Donovan Mitchell is why they're off the board. Yep. That's the only reason why. There's enough smoke there where that at least prompted Vegas to pull the numbers off the board. The Knicks are fascinating in that it felt like they were just terrible last year, and they still won 37 games and had like a neutral point differential. And they weren't that much worse than the year before. As crazy as that sounds, like metric wise, they were kind of similar to the team that was like the 4 seed the year before. And obviously they changed things up with Jalen Brunson. That's the big change for the Knicks. But like all the caveats apply, they could still trade for Donovan and trade a lot of stuff for him. If they don't do that in the near future, it's basically the same team plus Jalen Brunson and Isaiah Hartenstein minus Alec Burks. And that's kind of it. I mean, Nerlens Noel was like kind of around. Taj Gibson somehow is no longer on the team with Tibbs. That's bizarre, but they should be, in my mind, they are better on paper, but this conference is really loaded. So I don't know how good they are.
This conference, this division is really loaded. And one thing that I would feel really optimistic about with the Knicks, if basically any other human was their coach, was RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, Obi Toppin, Mitchell Robinson, Quentin Grimes are all super, super young dudes. And I would bet on, to one extent or another, maybe RJ a little less so because he's been in the NBA for a minute, and then more for the Quentin Grimes and Emmanuel Quickley type guys. I would bet on major internal development, and that mixed with Brunson, mixed with, Julius Randle, whatever was going on with Julius Randle last season. Lord knows what the hell was going on with him last year.
It was good.
Yeah, that leveling out a little bit, and the Knicks having a team where they have, 9, 10, 11, whatever it is, NBA players on it. I don't think Tibbs is wired that way. I don't think I think he'll put. He's the kind of guy who will put Quentin Grimes out there and he'll miss a defensive rotation and then not play for the next 5 games because that's just what Tibbs does. But like you mentioned, Brad, the amount of talent that this team has, they could be a very solid basketball team. I liked the Brunson deal. It's one of those deals that I think sounded like a lot now, but in 2 or 3 years, when we have the cap goes up a bit and you can pay guys a little more money, I think it's going to look a lot more reasonable. I wish they had, maybe Quentin Grimes is that dude. I wish they had someone with a little bit more defensive tenacity next to him in the backcourt instead of Evan Fournier. I don't, other than RJ Barrett, who is going to be asked to do a lot. And then, even then,
you know who isn't that guy, Bill?
Is it Cam Reddish?
Donovan Mitchell is what I was going to say.
Donovan Mitchell. Yeah.
That's not going to work.
I was going to say, Cam Reddish is on this team, and I thought maybe I just forgot about him.
Cam is, this is a Hawks podcast, we should always say Cam is still on the Knicks.
Yeah.
He was very openly shocked by the Knicks in the offseason. Like, it wouldn't stun me if they traded him before the season starts, but Cam is still on this roster and a former lottery talent. I know Hawks fans still kind of believe in him. Some people do. I mean, I still think he's young enough where he could help them, but it's like him and Tibbs doesn't ever make sense to me. So.
Well, that's the entire thing. Like, any path to him helping the Knicks out is dependent on him playing and learning and being developed by a coach who's willing to say, here's a talented 21-year-old. You know what I mean? And I just don't think he's going to get that. But yeah. I do like Brunson. I like RJ Barrett. I think he is a nice step forward in him. I like Mitchell Robinson. Julius Randle, Lord knows what you're going to get out of him. And then Emmanuel Quickley, Quentin Grimes, Obi Toppin, Isaiah Hartenstein are all guys who I think are solid NBA players. 3 of them very well might be on their way to Utah. But if we have the exact same Knicks team in terms of what they put on the floor next year, I wouldn't be particularly stunned. But if I have to bet on one side of the coin or the other, I would probably bet on them being a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, they are better, I think, on paper. The Randall thing is so weird. I think he is very obviously better than last year and worse than the year before. But I don't know where that lands him. You know what I mean? He was never as good as he was 2 years ago when he made every mid-ranger all season long. It was just a weird season. And last year it was terrible. He's not terrible. He's a good player. So it's
he wasn't just an all-star the year before. He was there was a little bit of Julius deserves it. He's been around he was legitimately one of the 12, 15 best players in the Eastern Conference the year before. He was very good. He got that team to the playoffs, and playoffs get there and they run into a team that listeners of this podcast are very familiar with, which kind of messed them up. But he's a good player. And I think if he can, if he goes from a guy who shoots 41, he shot 41% from the floor last year after shooting 46% basically from the floor the year before, 31% from 3 last year, from 41% from 3 the year before. Just looks so much more engaged on both sides of the floor 2 years ago. If he can tap back into being that guy, that's the kind of boost that actually can get the Knicks going from basically a repeat of last season to firmly in the playoff picture.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. Normally, I might make you pick the order of these teams, but considering the presence of Brooklyn and New York, it is essentially impossible. So we've covered.
Yeah. How about this? If the Nets do make a huge trade and are willing to struggle for a bit, I'll say Boston, Philly, Toronto, Brooklyn, New York. If they don't make that trade, I'd say flip Brooklyn and Toronto, and then Brooklyn's really push for one of those top.
I was gonna say. I mean, I think the thing for me really is picking between Philly and Brooklyn. If Brooklyn still has KD and Kyrie on the team, if they're both on the team and playing, and apparently Kyrie's going to be eligible to play all season, I don't know. I think with the way that they're doing the mandate or not mandate, he's going to be able to play. It looks like. So it's if they're on the team on opening night, that's a really good team. I mean, I think Philly's probably a little bit safer just because of how much they're going to rely on those guys. But I do think that that's really the battle. And then you get into, I think the Knicks are the worst team on paper in the division, but the Knicks are not a bad basketball team. The other divisions in the East have some bad teams on them. The Knicks don't really have, they're not bad. They're not necessarily that great in my opinion, but that's like a 35 to 43 win basketball team, somewhere in there. It's like something like middle.
Fair.
So anyway, Bill, thank you for joining me on this part of this podcast. I'm going to let you sign off with plugging yourself on every single one of these. So please tell people where they can find your work, because it's on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. But if you're not and you're listening to the podcast, where can they find you?
Yes, follow everything I do on Twitter at Bill DeFilippo. And
Go State.
Everything. Yes, Go State. This worked out the last time I did this, but if anyone is an Atlanta Hawks and Penn State sports fan, by all means, please let me know. Jason, shout out to you, and follow my Penn State podcast over at Roar Lions Roar. And then please make sure you're following along with everything I have going on and Brad has going on over on Dime and Uprock Sports.
Thank you for doing this, Bill. We'll have more with Bill in the very near future. Please subscribe. Check out Bill's content. Even if you don't like Penn State, subscribe and download the podcast. And then just delete it. It's fine. It's easy. Subscribe and download. It's a nice little hack.
Listen, it helps with sponsors and stuff. So
that's what I'm saying. All right. As for everybody else, please subscribe to this podcast as well. And we'll see you next time.